Hello, everyone. This is Jeff from Irenicast. And before we get into this week's amazing episode with Megan Devine, I just want to throw out there one more time that our street team meeting is happening on Sunday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And basically what we're doing is we're opening up a space for people to be involved in some of the behind-the-scenes stuff going on here at Irenicast, a focus group of sorts. And if you are interested in any of that, please email me at podcast@irenicast.com, and I will give you all the details and the link for our live gathering on Sunday at 4 p.m. All that information is in the show notes. And speaking of the show notes, for everything mentioned in the episode that you're about to hear, you can go to the show notes at irenicast.com/151 and get all of the relevant links and everything you need to find out more about Megan's work, and then also find all the ways that you can follow, and subscribe to Irenicast itself. So without any further ado, here is Rajeev sitting down with Megan Devine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast. This is Rajeev. On the first and third Tuesday of every month, we bring to you our perspectives on theology and culture from a post-evangelical lens. Thank you for joining another conversation to provoke your progressive Christian imaginations. This week, I have the privilege of talking with Megan Devine, and after the conversation is over, we're going to play over-under, so stay tuned for that. It should be a lot of fun. Megan's website is refugeandgrief.com, and the first sentence on the About page says volumes. Here it is. I'm Megan, a psychotherapist, writer, grief advocate, and communication expert, dedicated to helping you live through things you never thought you'd face. Wow. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks for having me.
You are someone who's sought after by lots of people because you talk about a topic, grief, that most of us run from and avoid even when we're in the midst of it. And so for my first question is really stealing a question from your About page again. How'd you get into this?
It's a big question. So, and first I want to touch on, you said I'm sought after for something that people don't want to talk about. What's interesting is if you ask the average person, do you want to talk about grief and the people you love dying and all of these things, and people are like, no, I don't want to talk about that. But if you just open the conversation, start talking about how hard it is to be here sometimes, how difficult it is losing people we love or losing things that we love, everybody wants to talk about it. So there's this sort of weird thing where we say, I don't want to talk about grief, but please, can we talk about grief? I got into this work. I've been a psychotherapist for a really long time, almost 20 years now. And back in 2009, I was a therapist. I was in private practice, and I was getting tired. I was getting sort of burned out from sitting inside in a chair and listening day after day after day. And with my partner, I was talking about how can we rework things so that I can take a break and step back and listen for what's next for me. I knew that I was doing good work, but it wasn't feeding me anymore. And so Matt and I decided that we were going to change things, and I was going to close the practice, and he was going to take over financial support for our family so that I could wonder about what was next. And before we got a chance to do that, Matt died in an accident. And I mean, everything exploded. I was a person who had never shied away from the hard things in life, had never, winced, yes, but turned away, no, from difficulty and challenge, both in my own life and in the lives of my clients and my friends. I was used to that hard territory, but Matt's death was orders of magnitude different. Watching someone you love disappear in an instant is bizarre, and it tears down the known world. And the landscape that I discovered in those days and weeks and months after he died was also unlike anything that I'd ever experienced before. And the support, in air quotes, the support that I received was bizarre, sometimes intentionally cruel, often unintentionally cruel. But, hearing from people, oh, you must have really needed to learn this lesson about letting go of things. who says that
Right.
after your person dies?
Right.
People saying, well, everything happens for a reason, or the two of you signed up for this so that you could bring something beautiful to the world. Like, what the hell is that?
Right.
The things that we say to people when we're faced with somebody's pain, especially pain that you look at and you're so stunned by it, so shaken by it that you don't know what to do. So you kind of do what you're taught, which is to jump in with platitudes or making somebody feel better. And, for those first few years after Matt died, I signed off of humans. I was like, I volunteered on farms. I fed people because that was the one way that I could be of service without having to talk to anybody. I stepped away from human interaction because it was too hard. And I swore that I was never going to do clinical work again. To live through this kind of experience and think about going back and listening to sort of day-to-day typical normal struggles, that was just a dissonance that I couldn't handle. What I found, though, was it was so difficult to be a grieving person in the world and to hear what passed for support and know how much needless suffering is dumped on people who are already struggling. I have what I would call an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for the world. And I knew that I could do something to change things, not just for me, but for, grieving people everywhere. I could make things better if I could talk about what's really wrong with the way that we come to grief in this culture, in our communities, in our personal lives. If I could do something to make that better, what else would I do? Right? Sometimes people will say, like, do you ever feel like there's other work that you could be doing? I'm like, what the fuck else would I do?
Right.
Right? Like,
Right.
no. You and I started out before we started recording here talking about like grief and loss happens for everybody. And it's not just when your person dies, but it's also witnessing suffering in the world. We're hearing so much more suffering these days.
Yeah.
What's happening with immigration, what's happening in the trans community, what's happening with communities of color. We hear so much more pain than we're accustomed to hearing. And we just don't have the capacity to respond to it with any skill, not when it happens in our own lives and not when it happens in the wider world. So that is my very long-winded answer to why I do the work that I do and what the work is, right?
Yeah.
Talking about how we pay attention to what hurts wherever that shows up.
Thank you for sharing the journey towards this work. So much of what drives us in what I would call helping professions are usually deeply personal stories. Our culture in the United States, we have a pretty awful relationship with grief. Can you just talk a little bit about things that you observe, you encounter, that you would say fall into that really awful category? One of the things that you did already mention that is one that I almost always, in my head at least, respond with "fuck you," is everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
So that would be near the top of my list for what I've observed is just really messed up in relationship with grief.
Yeah, I mean the library of terrible things that we say to people who are hurting is vast. And again, sometimes it's intentional, most of the time it's not. It's just poorly skilled. The sort of long arc of grief illiteracy is long. I mean, this isn't something that modern Western culture has created. One of the things that I do in my book is I talk about like the long reach of grief avoidance, right? Like it goes back a really, really long way. Big emotions are scary. Big emotions threaten to overturn relationships, communities, whole cultures, all of these things. Like there's got to be a reason why grief is so taboo, why being sad is so intolerable for people around us and for the community and the culture at large. We don't demonize something that isn't terrifying. So you look at all of the ways that we have tried to shush grief. Everything happens for a reason. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. At least you have 2 other kids. What did you do to cause this, right? Victim blaming is really pervasive in the grief world related to death, but also in the cancer community, in the chronic illness community, right? Like that person shouldn't have been crossing the street right there. They should have waited for the light. Okay, well, right. All of these things that we do to sort of otherize and distance from somebody else's pain because it makes it safer for us to be here. So there are lots of ways that grief avoidance shows up. But even things that don't seem nefarious on the surface, right? Like trying to cheer somebody up when they're sad. We cheer people up like it's our job, right? We can't let somebody whose baby just died be sad. That's fucked up, right? We step in and we're like, at least you know you can have a baby, you can try again, you're young, you can have more, at least you have 2 great kids already. We think that we're doing somebody a service by cheering them up, and what we're doing is we're dismissing and erasing their pain. We're telling them that it's not okay to be sad when your baby died. We're telling them it's not okay to be sad when your sister died of cancer at 27. And again, I mean, we're not, for the most part, mean, terrible people. We're doing what we think is correct. We're doing what we've been taught. We're doing what all of the movies tell us we're supposed to do, which is give your friends a good rah-rah cheerleading and make them happy again. And the sun will come out and there'll be rainbows and they'll be playing. And like, that, it's wrong. And one of the things that I talk about a lot is what I call epidemics of unspoken grief. We look at things like rising suicide numbers, increased social isolation, which we hear about a lot these days, interpersonal violence, which is nothing new, certainly, especially for certain communities, but we're hearing about it a lot more. The thing at the root of all of those different facets of human suffering is grief. And what that says to me is the way that we've dealt with grief, even just for the last 50 years, is not working for us. Trying to put the past behind you, medicating natural, normal, healthy grief and sadness, telling people to cheer up and move on, that it's not that bad, that they're still young. All of that stuff is not working. All of that stuff is creating a culture with rampant suicide epidemics, with rampant depression and anxiety and social isolation. It's created environments where we can look at the woman grieving the loss of her young son who was shot in his backyard holding a cell phone, and not recognize that person's pain, but instead go into political debates. All of our efforts to suppress and erase grief has created the culture we have now. It's not working.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And that last example that you cited, Stephen Clark, who was shot in his grandmother's backyard, happened here in Sacramento. And my wife and I were actively involved with the allyship with the family in seeking justice and holding law enforcement accountable. And we've been in close proximity to the family when they've spoken and embraced us. And, it's true, while I'm just thinking about my own heart and mind in those moments. You're there, you're beholding the sadness, so it's palpable. You're forced to acknowledge it. But outside of being in physical proximity to the mom and brother and cousins, I jump straight to the, how do we fix this? How do we keep this from happening again? How do we bring the family justice?
Yeah. And those are super complex issues. I think what's important, at least from my perspective, is to be jumping in there and doing the work, doing the allyship and making change happen, as also a way to protect the grief of those families. I think that the work is so important. And speaking out about it is so important, especially for, those of us in the white community being good allies and showing up and those sorts of things. And of course, in other communities, as a, non-white person yourself, that work is so powerful and so important. And for me, other people have their own reasons here, but for me, it's I want for all grieving people to have a bubble around them where they just get to be sad, where they just get to be angry, where they just get to fall apart. Because the rest of us all around them are so skilled at the work that we do that we can pick up the fight until or unless they're ready to. I don't mind that we jump into fixing the system that creates violence, the system that creates so much more grief and loss. I don't mind that we jump in to fix that. What I mind is when we jump in to fix grief. If you look at the survivors of the Parkland shooting, you look at those kids out there on social media and the shit they got, no matter what they did in those first days, right? Here's a picture of them coming together. How can they be eating pizza when their friends are dead? You look at them organizing and using their voices and being pissed. How dare they be so angry? They're not grieving correctly. I actually saw therapists chime in on social media to say these kids should not be allowed to bring their anger into social media. They need to be grieving. They need to be protected and sad. I'm like, who the f are you to dictate how they're grieving? Anger is part of grief. Outrage is part of grief, right? So when we're talking about grief and social justice, we can't divorce the wider cultural picture, the politics, from the personal expression of grief. I think where it gets tricky is we feel that intense, immense grief and it's hard. So we jump immediately to politics. We jump immediately to battle. We jump immediately to judging people's public expression of grief. All of that is the wrong approach. None of these issues are simple. I try to bring in these wider cultural, social justice issues into every discussion about grief because I feel like they're left out in the cold a lot. And I think it also helps to just widen that lens and look at the fact that grief is everywhere. And it's not just like I lost my grandmother or my brother died in a workplace accident, but it's also grief in the world and how important it is to open these discussions so that we can respond, so that we can respond with skill, so that we can choose what is my best response right now. Is my best response to do what I can, like contribute to a GoFundMe campaign so that this family doesn't have to worry about going to work this week or this month so that they can tend to the fact that their kid just got killed? Right. Or am I going to do advocacy work over here? Or am I honestly going to look to my own personal community and look at the ways that I am complicit in the culture that creates so much violence? Am I going to look at the ways I talk to my partner or my kids and talk about how hard it is to be human, how much it hurts that this world is full of so much pain and suffering? What is my response going to be? And for me, all of that stuff cooks back to how do we talk about pain? It's never that there's one right way to respond to personal loss, to community loss, to cultural loss. What I really want is for people to be paying attention to how they respond, interrupting their habitual responses and asking the questions that you were just talking about that you and your family did, it sounds like, so skillfully in response to that death. That skill around, here's what I know how to do. Is this a useful offer at this time for this person, this family, this community? And what else might I do to contribute to a world where, one, this doesn't happen as often, doesn't happen at all? And how can I contribute to a world where we can talk about this, where we can talk about how hard it is to be human, how complex and twisted this world can be, and how beautiful this world can be, right? I work with a lot of people whose lives have gone sideways in really strange ways. Like I talk about the statistical anomalies. So accidents and violent crimes and baby loss and suicides and natural disasters, like those are my people. I spend most of my time talking with, to, and for people whose lives have dissolved for atypical or in uncommon ways, really. And, this is the thing. No matter what kind of loss it is, what people remember is how cared for they felt, how dismissed or judged they felt. You can't erase the grief itself, no matter what kind of loss we're talking about. You can't erase the grief itself. What you can do is come up underneath and around that loss and offer support so that the identified grieving person or the identified family can be however and whoever they need to be at that time. It's like, I feel like it's such a big tangled ball of conversation here. Like we start talking about cultural responses to grief. We start talking about how we respond to grief in our own lives. What are the worst things that you hear? Where's the evidence of this happening? And like in 2 seconds, we're into racial violence. It is all the same story, right? You pull one thread and the whole thing falls apart. This is why I also often say, like, discussions about grief don't just belong in end of life discussions. They don't just belong, at the end of a normal Western lifespan. Right. They don't just belong in those places. They belong everywhere.
Absolutely. So in our pre-recording conversation, I mentioned one of my professors in grad school, Herbert Anderson, who pretty much devoted his life to dealing with grief and writing about it, teaching about it, and just offered a lot of great wisdom. He said he wanted to produce a bumper sticker, and I'm going to tell you what he wanted on the bumper sticker, and then I want to hear your response.
Hey.
He said the bumper sticker should say, or would say, "A family who grieves together stays together."
I think that's awesome.
Yeah, right? I thought so too.
I think that's awesome. And I, such a contrarian all the time. I think that's a great message. And I also think it's accurate, right? If you stick by each other, no matter what happens in your life, that's awesome. The best indicator of survival inside loss of any kind is how well companioned somebody feels.
Right.
There's such a sense of isolation, right? And I talk about the difference between pain and suffering, right? Pain for me is just that, the purity of loss, right? The purity of grief. It just sucks. It's hard. Suffering is what happens when you don't eat enough, you don't sleep enough, you don't have people around me, you don't have community. All of these things sort of make things worse. The family that grieves together stays together when you can experience your emotional, relational world together and feel companioned and supported inside it. I think those are the best votes for survival. Those are the things that sort of protect us in some ways against suicidality, drug addiction, social isolation, depression, anxiety, lingering effects of emotions that never have a place to go or never get heard. Relationships are what help us with that.
Yes.
The reason I'm like, little asterisks on that is that because we have such a faulty cultural idea of what it means to grieve, I think that you could say, the family that grieves together stays together, and then everybody has to grieve the way Papa does.
Right, sure.
In order to do this correctly.
Yeah.
Or you get 4 weeks to be sad as a family on this camping trip, and then you get your together and move on. Right?
Yeah.
So, yes, with an asterisk.
Right. And I guess the asterisk was the rest of the class.
That's right. Right. We're going to boil this down.
We unpack it. Right.
Right. Like we need our soundbite. Like, one of my common things on social media is show up, listen, don't fix. Right.
Yeah.
Like we like to boil things down to soundbites because they're useful. They're actionable. They're good reminders. They're good thought provoking snippets.
They give us something to hold on to.
Yeah.
In the moment of crisis.
That.
Yeah.
And I love that reminder that we are all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard here.
So that notion of having something to hold on to in times of crisis is a great segue to this next question, which is, I've heard it said by some sources that I would consider very credible that say religious people, devoutly religious people, navigate their grief better than non-religious people. Do you find that this is the case?
I gotta tell you that most of the messages and the comments that I get through various channels is that religious communities are some of the most poorly skilled people in responding to grief in their communities. Now, before everybody freaks out, here's why. There is so much religious language, and I'm not just talking about Christian traditions, but across a lot of different traditions, where sadness is just not allowed. If you have faith, especially faith in some sort of afterlife, then you shouldn't really be sad because your dad is in heaven. You're going to see them again. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Put your faith in Jesus just to go Christian for a second, and everything will be okay. It's that same don't feel what you feel. Everything is fine. Get over it and move on. Language dressed up in holy robes.
Right.
It's so pervasive in religious communities, so pervasive that many people leave their faith.
Yeah.
Which is really unfortunate. Because for me, the true use of faith, any kind of faith, I don't even care what people believe in. As long as it brings meaning and depth and connection in their lives, I don't care what God you pray to.
Sure.
For me, the real glory in faith is its ability and capacity to companion people no matter what comes. That is different than taking away somebody's pain. Spiritual bypassing is a really big deal.
Yeah.
Right. And spiritual bypassing is when we use spiritual buzzwords, spiritual messages, spiritual conditioning to say, don't feel what you feel because it's not as bad as you think. And that happens in traditional, what we understand as traditional religious communities. And it happens in things like the yoga community, what we used to call the New Age community. In the spiritual community, it is freaking rampant in Western Buddhism, right? all of these things that say like, Buddha says not to be attached to things and then you will have no suffering, right? No, he didn't. Right. Like, don't twist the historical Buddha like that, right? Like, from my understanding, having dabbled, and I will say dabbled, I am by no means a Buddhist scholar or practitioner or any of these things, but like, from my understanding, the Buddha came out of his family-induced seclusion, protection, went out into the world and saw how much pain there is and went, there is so much pain in this world. How am I going to be here and keep my eyes open to the pain and suffering of the world and not lose my mind? Never did the Buddha say, I'm going to look at other people's pain and tell them to rise above it. Those practices, and we can open this back up again to any faith tradition, any practice. The point of that practice, the point of the community, let's just stick with practice for a second. The point of the practice is not to make everything be sunny and rosy and not hurt. It's meant to help you survive the times that really fucking hurt. And as spiritual community, we're meant to stand by those broken places. We're meant to sit alongside the crater. I mean, it gets me every time I talk about this, when I think about what happens in faith communities when we miss our mission. Right? Your mission is not to cheer somebody up. It's not to remember that their kingdom is later. It's not to remind them that God told them not to grieve. It is to sit there in that broken place and keep your eyes open. Tolerate that pain. That is what your practice trains you for. I completely lose my emotional mind when I talk about that stuff.
Yeah. No, and I do too. One of the traps of conservative religion, like I grew up in, are the platitudes without anything to back it up. That's why I ended up leaving, is there were no answers to the question why. Like, how did you come to this? What does that mean? Like, well, it just means that's just it. That's
right. It's so reductive, right? It means what it means.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you question it, or you ask for depth, or you ask for nuance or context, then your faith is in question. Right. And this is this is part of, I'm going to use this phrase, conservative agenda. And I'm careful with that phrase, because that can get twisted and mean a lot of different things. But what I mean when I'm talking about that is sort of the reductive nature of religious community, right? Yeah. Where doubt is not allowed, where questions are not allowed,
right?
Where you are just supposed to take the soundbite, the bumper sticker, the passage thrown out to you as the answer to all of your questions. And it doesn't work. And again, like, you go back to the roots of any tradition, and there is always doubt in the founders.
Well, and the real danger of that not working is adherence to those communities know they're not working, but think it's their flaw.
Yes.
That it's not working.
Yeah. If
there is the wherewithal in many cases for them to point the finger where it belongs, which is at the institutional high control dogma, and say, that's up.
That's right.
What I'm going through is real.
I mean, what faith that takes to be able to go, wait a minute, this isn't me, this is them. To be able to walk away from something that is scary to walk away from for a lot of different reasons.
And that's why I'm a huge follower of your work, why I share a ton of your stuff on social media, because I am still connected to many people from my conservative world, people that I love dearly. And in this work on the podcast, we're kind of an ex-evangelical, unfundamentalist space. And so a lot of us are unpacking, it's a lifetime of unpacking.
Yeah.
And you help us be connected. You're one of those voices that says, that pain is okay. It's not supposed to go away. It might evolve over time, but it's there.
Yeah, exactly. I will say this as we're talking about religion. So I was raised agnostic. I often say that I was raised in a vacuum around spirituality and religion. Both my mom and my dad came from very conservative backgrounds, one Protestant and one Catholic, and were so wounded by those traditions and by the ways that the message got bastardized and weaponized within their own families. Yeah. That they felt it was better to not mention spirituality or religion at all. I talked to my dad about this, when I was in my 20s. I was like, why that choice? And he said, your mom and I just saw such a bad side of religion and the damage that it does. And we didn't want to color your opinion at all. We figured you would find your way into your own meaning, and which I think is beautiful. And also, like, you could have said something.
Right.
That would have been cool. But, there is so much beauty inside almost all of our traditions. And I spent a lot of my 20s studying different traditions and mythology and religion. Like, I am such a dork about comparative religion. And at their root, I feel like all traditions are just so beautiful and so powerful in the ways that they talk about the more than this, the more than what we see, that magic that connects and guides everything. I love that.
Yeah.
And it pains me to see how much it's twisted. It pains me that we have to remove ourselves from the mixed bag of religion that we grow up in, because, as you said, like, there's still beauty there.
Right.
There's still beauty in the conservative fundamentalist church. It is still there. It's just buried.
Yeah.
And it pains me to see people struggling to fit their grief, their life experience into a rigid system that does not serve them. But they, as you said, they think it's their fault that they don't fit in it. And I love that people are starting to look back at those systems and say, it's not us, it's you. If there is no room for grief in your church, there is no room for love in your church. Right. And we can also see this in the way that various religions and spiritual communities respond to the pain of the world. Do you respond with victim blaming and fear-based responses and scarcity? And it's okay for us to take care of our own, and we all want safe places for people, and we all want our homes and our neighborhoods to thrive. But yours can't, because if yours thrives, if we pay attention to your pain, there is not enough for us.
Right.
Right.
So in my work as a minister and spiritual leader in certain contexts, you get called into family tragedy, moments that are intensely private. So I go back to this one story, and I want to hear your reaction. And this story is one that I center myself with before either taking a phone call, making a phone call, doing a visit, and I will use it oftentimes in my meditation. So there's a mom who's at the kitchen window. She's at the sink doing dishes, and her son plays out front all the time. And they have a neighbor, an elderly neighbor couple who have a beautiful front porch, and he goes and sits there and talks to them. The mom of the elderly couple recently passed away. So she sees her son starting to play, and the elderly neighbor man is sitting on his porch in the rocking chair, pretty still, just still. And she sees her son stop playing. He goes over there, crawls, no words are exchanged, crawls into the man's lap and just kind of puts his head in his chest and stays there for what seems like forever. And the mom's like, what is going on? What's happening? And then after what, again, feels like an inordinately long time to the mom, the boy climbs down, no words are said, and walks in the kitchen, washes up, and is ready for his snack. And so she says to her son, I saw you over there with Mr. Brown. What were you doing? And he just calmly says, as he's eating his snack, I just sat with him and helped him cry.
Yeah. You just stay.
Yeah.
Right.
And so often we get locked into finding the right words.
We think there's something to do. There isn't anything to do. You just stay for what seems like an inordinately long time.
Exactly. I love that story.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing it with me.
You're welcome. So, Megan, tell us a little bit more about the work that you offer, the supports that are available, how our listeners can find you.
So, Refuge in Grief is the website. There's a great animation on the landing page of the website that, maybe you've already seen it. It's a great little animation on how to help a grieving friend. So if you're not really sure what to do, that's a great place to start and share that around. That little video has had, last time I checked, was over 28 million views.
Wow.
Which is so cool because as an educator, what I can see when people share that, when I kind of look at it from, our sneaky ways to see how people are sharing it, what I see happening is people sharing it to let's say a friend's timeline and saying, I watched this video and I learned that what I've been doing is the wrong thing. I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I'm going to do better to support you, after your sister died.
Right.
It's a really cool tool. So if you're not sure what you should be doing, that's a great place to start. And if you want to start, being part of the grief revolution and advocating for how to show up for each other better, how to be that person who walks over and puts your head on somebody's chest and just hangs out with them while they're sad, spread that video around, because that's a really cool thing to do. You can find me on social media. Instagram is my current favorite, at Refuge in Grief, also on Facebook at Refuge in Grief. And the Writing Your Grief course is kind of one of the coolest things that I've made for people. It's been running for about 6 years now. It's a 30-day writing space, writing community for people grieving any kind of loss to come in and tell the truth about what it's like to be them. It's unlike any other grief space I've ever seen. For most people, they come into that space and within the first couple of days, they say, this is the first place I've been allowed to tell the truth. There is something about being allowed to tell the truth.
Yes.
Without judgment, without advice. Oh my gosh, the rampant advice giving we do in this culture. It's a really powerful place. I talk about it like my acknowledgement laboratory. What happens when we listen to somebody's pain and don't try to fix it? I've been studying that for 6 years. I can tell you what happens. We create communities that are beautiful to each other, that are ferocious advocates for each other. That's the sort of stuff that happens within the writing course. So if you are looking for a place where you can tell the truth about how hard it is to be here, how hard it is to lose the people you love and the things you love, it's a really magical place. And all of the information about that is on the website. And a new group opens roughly every month. We take a couple of months off during the year, but you can always find information about that on the website. And then, of course, the book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Meeting Grief and Loss in a Culture That Doesn't Understand, is available everywhere in English, Spanish, German, and Chinese.
Wow. That's so great.
So cool.
And we'll have all those links. So those of you listening, we'll have all those links on the show notes, so you don't have to take notes while you're driving. Please don't do that.
Please don't do that. No. Safety first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you, Megan. Don't go away, because we're going to play a game in a minute here. But on the other side of the music, we will play Over, Under. Okay, and we're back, ready to play Over Under with Megan Devine, fabulous, fabulous guest. The way this works is we each have 3 things that we're going to throw out there, and we're going to react to by saying that's overrated or underrated, and we may disagree, and then we'll discuss. So, Megan, why don't you throw your first one out, and then I will throw my first one out.
Okay. So we're both West Coast people.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that you get this reference, because you've also spent some time in Oregon.
Yeah.
Voodoo donuts, overrated or underrated?
Oh, boy. This is going to offend people no matter what.
I know. It's why I chose this one.
So, yeah, man, God dang. That's
starting with a tough one right out of the gate.
So I'm going to go with overrated. I mean, they're donuts, and then they have clever designs, but it's like, Oregon's not that boring of a place where Voodoo Donuts should be as big of a deal as it is.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you on this one. Like, I think they're overrated. I don't personally like donuts. Nothing against donuts. People who love them, yay, go you. I'm not a fried food person. But the fact that people will stand in line for 3 hours for a hunk of deep fried, artificially colored dough is weird to me.
Yeah.
It's weird to me. And, if you visit Portland, do whatever you want to do. Like,
there's a ton of stuff to do.
But there are also, like, even if we're just sticking with donuts, there are some really, really amazing local donut shops. Spread your donut love around. I think it's overrated.
Spread your donut love around. There you go.
Equal opportunity donut time.
Get tested and then spread your donut love around.
Always donut responsibly.
That's right. Okay, so my first one.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise.
Oh, geez. I mean, which Tom Cruise era are we speaking of? All of them?
Body of work.
the aggregate Tom Cruise?
The aggregate Tom Cruise. The meta Tom Cruise.
I think I'm going to go with overrated for a similar reason to our donut thing, because people are just going to be who they are, right? Like, I'm not a fan of the kind of movies that he used to do. And again, not a value judgment on those movies, like just not my thing. The reason why I asked which era is like the Tom Cruise of today is like the whole religious cult, is he a jerk, isn't he a jerk thing. And I sort of feel like, meh, there are far more interesting things to argue about or spend media space on. So I think that people getting all in a tizzy about who Tom Cruise is behind the headlines is just an overrated action.
Yeah. I'm with the overrated too, and I've enjoyed maybe half of his movies, but like you could put almost any pretty face, and that can like contort themselves on a tight shot, tight shot, and a lot of it he works with good directors and
sure.
Hollywood formula films. So
there's kind of an interchangeable thing there where like, so Tom Cruise himself, I think, there we go. Yeah. Okay. So far, we're in agreement here.
This is uncomfortable. So
okay, well, just wait, because my choices get like really less. Okay, well,
but I mean, we started with controversy, and we ended up being on the same.
True. Yeah, so. That is true. Okay, Netflix.
Ooh, because I am such a Netflix consumer, and man, they do good stuff. I'm going to add a third category maybe and say appropriately rated, which may be a cop-out, but I think Netflix is kind of the deal right now. I mean, we're still in that where it's relevant. 5 years from now, it may not be quite as relevant, but I'm in the middle of watching the new season of Stranger Things. And I'm just like, it's great. It's not the best thing on Netflix, but I don't know. I think it's appropriately rated. What about you?
I'm going to go with underrated for a couple of reasons. One is, I think and this is talked about a little bit out in the wider world. I think one of the things that's happening with Netflix is it's making more people feel like it's possible to change the culture through we'll still call it the medium of television.
Sure.
Right. I feel like television as a medium was starting to get kind of prehistoric, dinosaur-like, wooden and stiff. And I feel like Netflix especially has started making it feel possible again. This is going to be a little bit of a Netflix love song, and then we'll link into why I think it's underrated personally. Instilling that hope that you can reach a lot of people and change things, I think is a really important thing, especially during this time in our culture where everything feels so dismal.
Yes.
Right? You look at Queer Eye. Yep. And how hopeful that is.
Absolutely.
And it's like what good, beautiful content that is. Like what happens when you just go in and you love somebody up and you encourage them. You don't sugarcoat things. You don't say that those torn sweatpants are just, you're rocking them. No, you go in and you go say like, that is not your best expression of your goodness. So let's help you like fine tune that. Yeah. What happens is you turn people into these glossy little vibrant animals who are much better at relating to themselves and to the world. Like who would have thought you could do that? Like that sort of like the hard hitting social impact stuff. I think that Netflix is doing an amazing job both delivering that content and making people feel hopeful that content can change the world.
That's an interesting twist. Yeah.
And then I think underrated for me personally, because I maybe no surprise for people, but I am a hard person to please with entertainment. And I think that I personally underrate Netflix because I see what's out there and popular, and I try to watch it and I'm like, I don't see this as funny. Like I don't find this entertaining. I also never find dramatized violence entertaining. So things like Orange is the New Black, like that's never going to work for me because I can't engage in violence for entertainment's sake. But there is what often happens for me is I just turn off all of those platforms rather than dive more deeply and find things that would really serve me. So I think that I personally underrate it as well. There we go.
All right.
My long missive on Netflix.
Yeah. No, good stuff. So my next one, potentially controversial. The Beatles.
I'm going to get hate mail on this one. Overrated.
Ooh.
Sorry, friends.
Ooh. I just saw the movie yesterday. And before I saw the movie, I would have agreed with you.
Really?
And I kind of think timing-wise, I think maybe we're actually underrating the Beatles and their contribution because they were pretty groundbreaking for their time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, part of the what the movie questions is like, what would the world be like if we didn't have the music of the Beatles? So
yeah, so I get that. And as with many things with me, like I feel like there's a couple of layers here. Music wise, I have never been a Beatles fan.
Okay.
Ever.
Okay.
So this is like when I say overrated, I'm like,
music. What about the Rolling Stones?
And hold on, let's finish with one controversy at a time here.
All right.
The cultural contribution, absolutely. Like I've never been like they didn't do anything. Of course they did. So did Elvis. So did like this and this and this. So like as far as cultural impact, I feel like that's a different discussion.
Okay.
Musically speaking, for me, they're overrated.
That's legit. Yeah.
Are you going to throw in the Rolling Stones? Because like I am a product of the 70s and the 80s, so I kind of am contractually bound to say, yay, Rolling Stones.
Yeah, I love the Rolling Stones.
And it's part of the soundtrack of that part of my life. But I mean, so are the Smiths, so are the Dead Kennedys. Like there's a lot in there. Like, yay.
You're ringing some bells.
See, 7 seconds, all this stuff. Yeah. Dead Milkman. Okay, we could go in memory lane here. So I'm gonna go with overrated on the Beatles.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Even if we talk about, whatever.
Sounds
okay,
good.
So I had are we on my number 3 now?
Yeah, you were on your number 3.
All right. I had a really hard time coming up with number 3 because, this is a game, but this stuff is important. Right.
Right.
So, and I was trying you can't go with food again because you already did that. You can't go with pop culture because you already did that. This is the way my brain works. So I came up with international travel. Under or overrated, friend?
100% underrated.
Yeah.
100%. It's you've got to travel.
Yeah.
You've got to sit with people that are different than you, eat food that you've never eaten before, listen to music, smell smells, but go. Don't be a dick when you do international travel. Yeah. Go with an open heart and an open mind, like you actually have a lot to learn about the world. But yeah, it's the best thing in the world.
It really is.
It's the best thing.
And I agree with you. I feel like it's underrated, and because I'm a complicated person, I also feel like it's overrated depending on how it's used, right?
Well, and where you go.
I mean, I feel like it. You can do international travel in sort of Voodoo Donut style.
Yeah,
where you go as a tourist to fill up your Snapchat, and you're like check it off your list, and you did it. Which, it's fine. Like sometimes there's really cool shit to go see in the world that you just want to take a snapshot of and be like, yay, not dissing that in any way. But I feel like what you just described, like that, even though there are more people doing that and like going to acknowledge and explore other cultures. I love the acknowledge part, like not going in there as a Western person being like gawking at the whatever, but going to acknowledge and to learn.
Yeah.
I still feel like that is in many ways underrated. International travel is sometimes really difficult, and it can bring up a lot of stuff, beautiful stuff and difficult stuff. And, certainly as a white, well-educated, reasonably wealthy and definitely privileged person, traveling to other communities that are different, right? Like international travel is hard because it makes you look at the real scope of the world and how complex and beautiful and difficult it is. And as with most difficult, painful things, I think we underrate that hard knowledge. There's a tendency to romanticize in travel and in learning and all of these things. And I feel like the heart expanding, humbling aspects of international travel are deeply underrated.
Yep. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
Heart expanding and humbling for sure.
Yeah.
All right. My final one.
Do it.
It's like yours was awesome. Yeah. I know you were conflicted about that. Mine is.
I underrated my last one.
Mine sucks because I've used it before, but it's kind of a thing. It's like one of my recurring things.
Okay,
all right. Avocado toast.
Oh, geez. How about this? I think that the controversy around it is super overrated. Like, it's fucking toast.
No. Let's talk about the thing, Megan. That's what we're talking about.
We can talk
the
about
avocado toast itself.
We can talk about the thing, but we
You're
can't talk
going right
about
to
the
the-
thing without talking about the more meta of the thing.
You're right. I mean, it's like, you know,
right? Like, let
focus
people
here.
eat whatever
Focus
the
for a
fuck they
second.
want. And why are we
Don't
bitching about
let people think.
about like you could afford a house if you stop eating avocado
You're missing the spirit of the game.
No, I am not. Because the spirit of all games is to always bring them back to the typical complexities of being alive, because that is what being around me is all about. Now, okay,
Yes.
so the thing itself,
Right.
I think is underrated, to be honest. I think avocado toast itself is underrated because we get caught up in the whole like argument about whether it should be a thing, how much the thing should cost, when we're like, we are talking about sustenance that's actually pretty damn tasty.
Sure.
Unless it's done badly, right?
Understood.
Like,
but how hard is it to put avocado on a piece of toast?
Oh, Pumpkin, have you ever had bad avocado toast? Because I have.
I've had bad avocados. I've had bad
bread and put them together. What do you have? Bad.
Yeah.
Toast.
All right.
Right? It is actually difficult. I say that it's underrated because, like, one, really, there are more important things to bitch about and like take action on than.
But you're talking about the controversy, not the thing.
I know. They're related, and as a food vehicle itself, I still feel like it is underrated because, like, the marriage of a couple of things put together can sustain you for a whole day and be tasty.
From a nutritional perspective, I'm with you. And simplicity is good.
Simplicity is good.
Returning,
like there's a lot of room for like the Zen artistic minimalist thing with a good avocado toast. There's a place here in Portland that makes fantastic avocado toast. Like, you can raise simple ingredients to a really gorgeous aesthetic.
Absolutely.
And it's really tasty, right? Like, they make homemade ricotta. They have really good bread, and then homemade ricotta, and then a very nicely ripe avocado with some lemon zest and pepper on top of it. It's delicious.
You know, you could have described any other food in such a beautiful and sensual way, and I'd be like, oh, I'm feeling hungry. I don't feel hungry because I think avocado toast is overrated.
Okay. And the beauty of this is that you get to think that. You get to know that in every fiber of your being.
It's a pluralist show.
I will never make you eat avocado toast.
No judgment. The truth is, I enjoy avocado toast when I've had it. Yeah.
You see, and you were just telling me not to, like, we're not rating the controversy, we're rating the factual food item itself, and you just went into controversy.
I could enjoy something and think it's overrated, right?
Okay, good. All right, good point. I'll take that.
So that's where I'm at. Okay. All right.
Got it.
That was really fun. I love the fact. I love the fact, Megan, that we could talk about something so difficult. And we both, I mean, people can't see us, but we both shed tears during our conversation around grief at different points in our conversation. And then we were able to shift. And one of the main reasons I'm glad you were willing to do this game is I believe that grief and joy are not enemies. Mm-hmm. Grief and joy are accomplices that help us attain a fuller humanity. Yeah. And a fuller realization of self.
They're not opposites, and they're not replacements for each other.
Right.
I think we get confused, and we think that the opposite of grief is joy, and that's not accurate. Exactly. And I think we also feel like if you can find some joy in your life, that means you're no longer grieving, and that's wrong. We are human beings capable of holding a lot of different things at once, joy and grief being some of those things.
Absolutely. And I think many of us can relate to this, where some of my most happy moments are when we're in the midst of deep grief. Yeah. Because a lot of times
humor is awesome.
Or you're with family and you reminisce, and there's this rich laughter amidst deep sorrow, and it's all together. It's all mixed in, like a good avocado toast. It's all there. Well, that will do it this week for us, friends. Megan, remind us how we can find you online.
refugeingrief.com is the website, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Refuge in Grief.
And you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter at RevRajRambob. And as for Irenicast, don't forget to subscribe to the show and never miss an episode. We're available on all major podcasting platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and now Pandora. And while you're there, if your platform allows it, leave us a rating and or review. We're always looking for more and more ways to hear from you. And that's it for this week. This is Rajeev. Peace.